All right, everyone. Thank you guys so much for tuning into Atoma. This is the third session of our Bible study, and we're just blessed to have this opportunity to share. We're filming a little bit different today because we're missing Kobe. Pastor Kobe is not with us today, but he'll be with us the next time, hopefully. He's busy, caught up in Portland. But today with me, we have the usuals with Pastor Kyle, Pastor Marc, Pastor Alex, Pastor Peter, and myself, Pastor Ben, and we're just going to be going into the Word today. So let me just pray before we get in the text. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you so much for being with us again, for giving us another opportunity just to share your Word and just to study your Word. I pray that all who listen will be drawn closer to you, and I pray that everyone and the families represented here and everybody who's listening, Lord, may you just continue to keep them safe and keep us healthy from the virus that's going on, and just keep our loved ones safe. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Amen.
All right, the text for today, the text we'll be looking at is John chapter 21. John chapter 21, verses 15 to 25. The last chapter of John. If those who are listening, if you could turn there too, we want you to follow along, not just watching, but participate in our study. We're going to be looking at John chapter 21, verses 15 to 25. 10 verses, so we can each read 2 verses. I'll start, and then Kyle, then Marc, then Peter, then Alex. All right. John chapter 21, 15 to 25. Let's start reading. It says, when they had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" He said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." He said to him, "Feed my lambs." He said to him a second time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" He said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." He said to him, "Tend to my sheep."
He said to him the third time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter was grieved because he said to him the third time, "Do you love me?" And he said to him, "Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you." Jesus said to him, "Feed my sheep."
That me?
Go for it.
All right. Most assuredly, I say to you, when you were younger, you girded yourself and walked where you wished. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hands, and another will gird you and carry you where you do not wish. This he spoke, signifying by what death he would glorify God. And when he had spoken this, he said to him, "Follow me."
Then Peter, turning around, saw the disciple whom Jesus loved following, who also had leaned on his breast at the supper, and said, "Lord, who is the one who betrays you?" Peter, seeing him, said to Jesus, "But Lord, what about this man?"
Jesus said to him, If I will that he remain till I come, what is that to you? You follow me." Then this saying went out among the brethren, and this disciple would not die. Yet Jesus did not say to him that he would not die, but, "If I will that he remain till I come, what is that to you?"
This is the disciple who is bearing witness about these things and who has written these things, and we know that his testimony is true. Now, there are also many things that Jesus did, were every one of them to be written, I suppose the world itself could not contain the books that could be written. That's the text that we're reading today. Peter and Jesus, we keep coming back to Peter, the guy with so much zeal, so much energy, but it's also his downfall sometimes. Any observations? What popped out to you guys when you guys were reading this text?
The first thing I noticed is that the preceding chapter really seems like a conclusion to the book of John. If you look at, for example, verse 30 of chapter 20, it's basically closing off the entire book and saying, like, "In that believing you may have life in his name." And it looks like there's a conclusion there. And so, like, something I enjoy personally is music. That's one of, like, it's what I majored in college along with theology. And so this kind of seems like that false ending to the end of a song. Like, and it keeps going because there's purpose for it. There's a moment that's building up. And so, like, that the story kind of resonates that in in the chapter to me personally, because it's like there's something that's still not done yet. There's something that you have to hear before this really important book, gospel about love, is done. There's one last thing you got to hear, which says to me that this is very important. There's something that we need to see here. That's one of the first things.
I think, of course, it always pops out that we all know that Peter denied Christ 3 times, and in the text, he's asked 3 times if he loves him. And there's kind of that play there between denying and loving, and Peter's kind of frustrated at it by the end. Like, of course I love you. Like, why would you be questioning this? And I just think it's kind of funny, because I think we find ourselves like that with God sometimes, where we've denied him, or we've pushed him away, or we've pulled out of the relationship. And when he comes back asking us those questions, we're like, come on, Jesus, what do you mean? Like, I'm here. Like, I love you. And I think the persistence of Jesus is incredible, but I also think that there's a little bit of, I don't want to say like audacity of Peter, but I almost am like, Peter, why would you be irritated by this question being repeated? Like, of course he's going to ask you a couple times, but it's this reinstatement of the relationship and this rebuilding of the relationship. And I think if you've studied Greek at all, you know that the play of agape and phileo here in the text, but the first 2 times Jesus asks Peter, do you agape me, which is this divine, deep, intimate kind of love. And the last time he asks him, do you phileo me? And that's more of the brotherly love. And so he's trying to instill this love in Peter, and this relationship in Peter that's really fundamental.
And in that same sense, like looking near the end, like verse 20, Peter's surveying this scene, and he's looking at John, who's leaning on Jesus, who's relaxing and chilling with Jesus. Again, reiterating to me in my mind, because again, I'm lucky and I have a dad that I can relate this with. That father-son, the parent-to-child relationship there, that's like John is just there laying on this guy he knows loves him more than anything in the whole world, and they're all there together. That scene to me paints such a beautiful picture and such a beautiful relationship, kind of going off what Kyle's saying, like that agape and phileo love, showing it in his character, and Peter exemplifying the child in the situation in the relationship.
Something that just I think, especially with what Kyle touched on, it's really inspiring and really motivating to see that for every time you deny Jesus, Jesus does ask you, and he does try to bring you back in, like every single time. 3 times Peter denied, 3 times Jesus asked, do you love me? Trying to reel it back in, not to try and call him out, but to bring him back to relationship. And it's like interesting, because I know so many times I think like when we do wrong things, we feel like there's a point where Jesus is not calling us. Like after I do this one, like Jesus doesn't call, but this shows us for every single time he'll call you back. You know, like there's not like, oh, you did that action, okay, Jesus is not going to call you back this one, right? Like Peter literally publicly said, like, I don't know him, right? That's like a pretty, like I think of all the things you can do, like that's pretty bad, right? Like to verbally say it, to show in your actions to say it. Sometimes we show with our actions, but no one ever says those words. Peter verbally said, like, I don't know him. It's not me. But yet Jesus checked him to try and rebuild that relationship for every time he did that. And so there's no limit to every time Jesus reaches out to us for the things that we do that can harm that.
And I think the craziest thing about that whole exchange is, like I mentioned earlier, how there's agape love and phileo love. Well, the first time that Jesus asks him, do you love me? Jesus is using that word agape, and Peter responds with phileo. So Jesus is asking, like, do you love me with this divine, deep, like, love that doesn't compare to anything else? And Peter is saying, Jesus, I love you like a brother, man. And then because he does that, the next time Jesus asks him, do you love me? Jesus uses the word phileo. And so what you see is that Jesus kind of meets Peter where he is. He knows that Peter's not really at that place yet to agape. And so Jesus says, you know what, I still agape you, but let me come and meet you on your level and see kind of where you're at with things, and we'll get there together.
And like I think for me it's like this idea of like he says like, you know, like Peter, do you love me more than these? And he says, yes, I know that I love you. And then like he goes like, okay, then like feed my lambs, which, you know, like love other people basically. That's what I get from that. And I think that I've been really like listening to a lot. You guys know like Tim Jennings? Like he's that Adventist guy. I think he's a doctor. And he always talks about like, he talks a lot about like the natural law of God and how his law works. And how like really like, yeah, like first 4 commandments talk about a love with God. And if you are able to experience a love from God, you're then capable of loving other people. And I feel like just like in every verse we've done, even the last 3 weeks, I just kind of see that through every like verse. That's really just changing the perspective of like this idea that like this natural process of love, like when we are loved by God, we experience love from God, we are then able to love one another. And that's just kind of like the natural thing. Like Tim Jennings talks about like how like if a plant like stores up all of the carbon dioxide it produces and keeps it to itself, it will die. But like in nature, we see that everything kind of like produces for another, right? It's like the circle of life, Lion King. Like it's this idea. And I just kind of like, I don't know, for me, like everything we've read so far, I just really show that like Jesus is trying to teach this, like this natural law of love. Like when you experience love for me, you are now able to love one another. And just kind of like watching this process of Peter moving in this and trying to finally understand this idea. I don't know. It's kind of cool to me anyways.
No, it's true. We can only share true love when we actually truly experience and grasp the love that God's giving us, I think. I agree with that.
I just want to add also, just touching on what you guys were saying earlier, that Jesus will meet you or met Peter where he was. In verse 20, like verses 20 through like 23, there's this interaction about Peter is trying to compare himself or what Jesus is saying to him, like, is that the same thing that Jesus is saying to other people? And I think Peter does this for the fact that, like, he's being restored from the fact that he had denied Jesus. He didn't remain faithful to Jesus. So now he's kind of like, okay, but you're saying this to me, but I don't feel deserving of you loving me. I don't feel deserving of you bringing me back into the fold. I don't feel deserving of none of that, because look at this guy who loved you, who stayed with you, and like, you're saying this stuff to me, like, why me? And going back to the point that, I don't remember who made this point, but that like when Jesus meets you where you are, like, it's a personal thing. It's for you. And Jesus says to him, like, don't worry about him. We're not talking about him. I'm talking to you about you, and I'm telling you about my love for you. So what's going on with other people, it doesn't matter. This is a one-on-one conversation. And I really like that, because it just kind of shows that, like, no matter where you are, Jesus doesn't want you to compare your sins to other people's sins, your situations to other people's situations. He just wants you to focus on what he's saying to you one-on-one.
Yes. Actually, that's actually really where I want us to go next. So thanks, Moly, for going there, because that's like the craziest thing. And like, I like how Jesus checks him. He's like, what is, like in my version, ESV says, if it is my will that he remain until I come, what is that to you? And I asked myself, like, how many times did Jesus ask me that? Like, what is that to you? I'm looking at something like, oh man, like this pastor is doing something like this, and like that's some high quality thing, or like that's something really cool. Man, I can't do that. And like, or like, man, I want to be exactly like Jesus asked, like, what is that to you? I'm like, man, this person has this testimony where they did all these things, they were able to do all this stuff, and then now they're being, leading these ministries or whatever. He's like, what is that to you? All these things that can come in your mind. How many times does God just check me? Just check us, saying like, what is that to you? You follow me. Yeah.
Exactly. Like when a pastor like makes this poster that's so much better than any poster you could make, and then it's like the cover of Atoma, and you're like, man, Like,
Yeah, Jesus has to ask me, what is that to you? I look at Kyle, he's like, what is that to you, man?
You guys are wild. No, I definitely have related a lot to this text, and it's a text that has always been with me because I don't know about you all, but I have a problem with comparing myself to others. And I think in ministry, I think in life, but in ministry, it can be really easy to look at other churches or other people. I remember when I first we first started our Friday night contemporary service at my church, and it was the area that I was kind of being assigned to lead, and I had a team of people. We would go to like the Hillsong Church in Kansas City, and it was always like really inspiring, but also very discouraging because it was like, how are we gonna? We can't do this. What are we gonna do? And we really just had to focus, and I especially had to focus on this reality that God doesn't need me to look at other people and compare or be jealous or worry or have anxiety because I need to attain what they're doing. Like, actually, God has called me to fulfill something, and he's called you to fulfill something and do something. And when we are fixated and focused on what other people have and are doing, we're not able to fulfill and do the thing God is uniquely calling us to do. And it's kind of cliche to say that, but at the same time, it is a huge reality, because no matter what, there's always something bigger and better, or someone who's better than the person you think is doing it great. And so really what I think we should focus on is not someone who's doing it a little better than us, but the one who does it the best. And that's Jesus, the author and the finisher of our faith. Someone might be doing it good. I might be doing it well, but he's the one who is always doing it better. And so I think for me, I've just had to like really lean into fixing my eyes on Jesus and staying focused on Jesus. And when you look at Peter here, there was something said to Peter by Jesus, and maybe you guys know where I'm going with this, but he said, on this rock I will build my church. And so this guy is looking around at other people. Oh, what are you going to do with him? Is he going to be at the church with a 10-person staff? Is this lady, is she going to be, associate pastor at this place? But Peter is literally the guy that Jesus says his church will be built on. And I just find that so funny and so crazy, because he's the main one trying to climb the ladder in the ranks. And Jesus is like, chill, man. Like, I got you. I have a place for you. You're going to do something big. And that's just been always encouraging for me.
Yeah, like, I guess question to everybody just on that topic: how do we deal with spiritual comparison? How do you battle that? I mean, Kyle just gave us an explanation of it, but what do you guys think? How do you guys battle with spiritual comparison? Maybe feeling like our burden's too much. Maybe we feel like we don't want to do more. Maybe we're scared of the responsibility that we know God's putting on us, or just even in our walk, not being able to look a certain way like someone else, or do things like someone else, or maybe we always feel like we're not enough. How do you deal with the battle of that?
No, I think for me, it's like, I did 4 years of theology, and I was a bad student. Like I always like kind of looked at like the typical like standard of what a pastor should look like. And I looked at myself, I'm like, man, I'm not even close to that. But it's like, I like something that for me, like personally, since I was like 17 years old, for some reason, like when I would spend time with God, it's like my ISO with God. Like I've never felt like the need to do something different. It's like, it's always been a refresher to me, like to spend time with God. I don't feel that. Like a lot of my friends will be doing things, like even just recently, a lot of my friends are starting churches and doing all these big things. And I feel like really left behind. And then I'll go spend time with God, and like, he'll just like ask me simple questions. Like, why would you want to do one? And I think it's a question of the heart, right? Just like Jesus doing with Peter here. Like, what would you do differently if you're going to do one? Just like ask me these questions. And I just feel like that's what kind of like eases my like need or nature to compare myself to other people. Like with God, I don't feel that pressure, and I never have. So I don't know. That's my thing.
Mm.
This last year, I was a dean at a dorm at a school in Maine, and I remember, like, if you're looking online, it's impossible not to see any comparison things in front of your face, because they're just there. And I remember looking at a few of those and being really concerned about that, and trying to, like, all right, what am I going to do? I need to be on this. So, okay, like, I'm an innovator. What am I going to do? What's the next step? Where am I going to be? And I think that went on for like a few months, and it just, that was my mindset. What am I going to do? What am I going to do that's really important, that's going to measure up to all these other things that are happening? Not only ministries, but just cool things that my friends or peers are doing. And I neglected the people that needed to be the most, the kids at the dorm. Oh man, like, I just wasn't there. Like, and if you were in the dorm last year and you're watching right now, you know that period I'm talking about. But, like, man, it's a struggle. And I had to step back. I was humbled. I realized that the most important thing for me to do was to pay attention to what's right in front of me, and where I can be the most loving and where I can make the most impact. And that's the people that you're living around, the people that you're living with, the people that you're doing life with. And that's what you need to focus on. It's not so much of like comparing yourself. It's more of, how can you better yourself so that right where you are right this second, you can be the most effective, loving person possible. I think that's something that hit me right in the face.
Mm. Moly?
I think for me, what has what comes to mind for me is, like, I had to realize that everybody is meant to touch somebody. So, like, there's somebody that Peter can touch or can minister to that I can't. There's somebody that Marc can minister to that I can't. And so for me, going into ministry, like, listen, people really don't be looking like me in ministry. Like, I didn't meet a Black female pastor until my 12th grade year in high school. So I had a lot of insecurities about ministry and if that's where I belonged. And, like, I had a lot of nights where your girl stayed up crying because I was like, Jesus, this is hard. And I really had to come to understand that, like, there's somebody, even if it's only one person, that I minister to and that I introduce them to the love that Christ has for them, like, that one person is important. And that's my mission to reach them. It's my calling to reach them, you know? So I think I had to stop comparing myself to other people, because there's nobody else like me. I am unique and wonderful, and, like, you guys are honored to know me. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
I don't disagree with that.
It's true. No, I think that's a huge thing. You guys all said something that is very encouraging. I think the way I've dealt with it, I've always struggled with comparison because, like, for me specifically, I am the second born. I'm the youngest in my family, and I always hated that feeling because I felt like my brother was like the main guy. I felt like he knew how to do things. He was supposed to, he had all the tools, all the right stuff. And I just felt like I was just always in his shadow. And that was a big struggle for me. But I think when I started understanding just the concept that we all have something to bring to the table, that's what kind of helped me get along with it. And I still struggle with comparison, and, like, I still battle with that. But a huge thing definitely is that we all have something to bring to the table. Yep. Each one of us, you know, like, life, this whole journey, ministry, in our personal lives outside of ministry, it's like a potluck, man. It's a potluck for real, you know? And God asks each one of us to bring something. He's not just asking you guys just to pitch in to buy someone, like, buy the juice that someone else is buying. He's asking each one of us to make a dish and bring it. I know that analogy was really food-based, but it's just that, like, it's important. It is important for us to understand that, like, we each have something to bring, and only each one of us can make that one dish, whatever it is. and God's asking us to focus on mastering that thing. And yeah, someone else might look like a really big, nice dish, but that's to them, right? And yours might not look the same way, but that's what God wants you to bring. And once you get confidence in what God is calling you to bring, that's when you can do things so freely. That's when it's so encouraging. That's when it's a blessing, because you're doing what you've been asked to, and you're bringing what you're supposed to bring.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
And to add to that, Ben, something that really I've learned through experience is that a lot of the times the things we want to attach ourselves to, because I think that's really what it is. We don't feel like we have enough worth or value, so we feel like we have to attach ourselves to people or like movements or institutions or groups. Usually those things don't bring the joy and the fulfillment that we think they will. Like when I was pastoring, I pastored for like 4 years, and in that time I interviewed at 3 of like Adventism's like large institutions. 2 times it was for a youth pastor job at different places, and another time was for an associate chaplain job at one of the universities. And I'm not sharing that to like say, oh look, he interviewed somewhere big or whatever, but the reason I'm sharing it is because I thought that was like the pinnacle. Like, man, once I'm at a big institution or at a huge, university church, and then I've like made it, and I am worth something, and like I'm with those people that I've been looking up to. But when I interviewed at those places, I realized like, man, they're just normal places. They're just normal churches, normal institutions. And I share that because a lot of times we think that there's this kind of like place that we have to make it to, or this achievement we have to make, when really I think when we're looking at it through that lens, we're thinking about ourselves, and we're not focused on the people God is calling us to serve, or the thing that he's calling us to do right where we are. And I definitely have to admit that there have been times in ministry where I was focused on people, but I was also focused on where I was going to end up. And it was only through interviewing at those places and seeing them that I realized it's really not about that stuff. That stuff doesn't even really matter. It always boils down to people and what we can do in people's lives through Jesus. And one of my mentors said it best. He said, the best way to have success in life is to treat it like a baseball game. He loves baseball. And he says, great baseball players don't become great by focusing on being great. They become great by hitting the ball that's in front of them every single time. And so when the ball comes at you, hit it. You might hit it far, you might hit it short, you might miss, but the whole point is swinging the bat and hitting the ball. And I've really taken that into consideration with everywhere I am now. Wherever I'm at, what ball am I being called to hit, and just focus on what's right in front of me. And I've found really a lot of peace in that, because I'm not worried about tomorrow. I'm worried about right now.
Mm-hmm. Mm. Any closing thoughts on this text as we wrap up?
Didn't you guys grow up watching I grew up watching that in Spanish, and it would be like Relatos Animados del Antiguo Testamento, which basically means, cartoons from the Old Testament, or the New Testament, sorry. And I remember seeing this scene. It was a beautiful sunset painted in I forget, it's like Turner Entertainment or something that made these videos. They were VHS. They had a purple label on the top. And I remember seeing the scene. It was the beautiful sunset, some like palm trees by the beach. There's a little fire going, some fish cooking, and you see Peter there talking to Jesus, and Jesus is talking to him. And it really is such a beautiful scene. It really is. Like, if you it's going to be different for everyone that's reading it, but like your mind will paint a picture of what the text is saying, and all it's saying is, I love you. And all you got to do back is love everyone else. And that's one of the simplest yet most complex things. And I think every day we should strive to do better at that one thing, just to love everyone else.
Mm-hmm. True.
Peter was originally a fisherman. And I think it's crazy that Jesus met him back to where he started,
Yeah.
just to tell him he loves him. You know, I think there's like a beauty in that. It's like poetic, and it's just like, man, Jesus doesn't mind us going back to where he met us. You know, and like I think it's like sometimes we think like the walk with God is some linear and it has to be this like one path, and it's just very like some straight line, and that's all it is ever. But it's like there's a beauty to it. Like, you know, it's more than one direction, and God's just with us always, all the part of the ways, and He'll meet us wherever. And He's just to tell us, just remind us of His love for us. I think there's beauty there. Just in closing, to everyone who's listening, we need to know that Jesus is telling us that He loves us, and He's a personal God, very personal God. So much that, like, despite everyone is there, all the other disciples are there, He's talking to Peter. And sometimes in God's personalness, or how He tries to be personal with us, we have to try and cast it on someone else, right? Jesus is looking at Peter, and Peter's looking at John. He's looking and like, right, and like God's not asking that. God's looking, trying to have a face-to-face conversation with all of us. He's looking at you, and He's saying, "Look back at me. Don't look at anyone else." And I think that's the important thing. And when we can grasp that He's looking at us, and that He wants us to just look back at Him, focus on Him, see what we can bring to the table, and listen to what He's calling in our individual lives. That's when we can really get Him. That's when loving other people is easier. That's when accepting His love is easier, because He's a personal God. Yeah. So we just want to encourage all of you just to continue just to seek God out personally. And thank you so much for tuning in to Atoma. God bless.